Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon podcast, and welcome back to. We're going to talk about it. We've got a lot to talk about. Not quite sure where to start, so we'll definitely get to that. But we just did a rewatch of the City match, which honestly, George, just coming out of it, I feel really positive. Really positive about it. There's so much to sort of break down and stuff. If you want to go check that out, you can do from the link in the description for a free trial on Patreon, or you can sign up as a YouTube member. So please go do that if you're interested. But yeah, we broke down the whole game, broke down how Arsenal, I felt, matched City tactically, technically, physically. There's certain aspects of the game now that I feel we are better than City at. Doesn't mean I think City are better or worse than us at everything. They're definitely better than us at certain aspects of the game. But in terms of matching them, in terms of coming at the game, so many kind of we'll come to the narratives of things later, but lots of stuff that's come out of the game and sort of conversations about the game that just don't reflect actually what happened in terms of how Arsenal approached the game. People are going to look back on this as Arsenal sitting in the low block and coming to the Etihad and doing whatever. It's not what happened. Go watch the game. We came out. We stepped out. So William Saliba's pressing onto Bernardo Silva in the man-for-man press, in their past their centre circle. It's unbelievable. So yes, so much to do. But yeah, sort of overall thoughts on the game before we move on to the other stuff.
I really encourage people not to listen to commentary and watch the first 5 minutes of a match.
Apart from us.
Yeah.
But this is a key point, isn't it? The first 5 minutes are always key.
Yeah, I really think that it shows the intention of both teams, by the way. I don't even come from an Arsenal perspective. I think both teams show their face in the first 5 to 10 minutes of every match in terms of what they're looking to do, right? And I think one of the biggest takeaways that you're going to find is that Arsenal absolutely did not want to go into a low block. They absolutely were very aggressive in a man-to-man press, so much so that they committed their center backs and actually asked a lot of Thomas Partey and of our defenders. Saliba would follow Bernardo Silva well into the final third and into the middle third in terms of a man-to-man press very, very often. And it was a chess match in terms of whose build-up was better to go long. And I think we allowed Bernardo Silva and Gundogan to be free in the half spaces because we were so aggressive man-to-man in terms of out wide, in terms of from the front pressure. And we asked, are you good enough to find your players between the lines? Because we trust our center backs and our DM to jump and run more than you or outrun you when you get the ball.
And was this, sorry to cut you off, was this the first game that we've left Gabriel 1v1 against Haaland? Because I think Pep in the pre-match said they put 2 on Haaland and we can't do anything about it. But I think this is the first game we did that. It's trust, man.
Yeah. And I think also a lot of it, for as much as I felt Calafiori, who we, again on rewatch, struggled with his defensive distances, there was a little bit of trust from Mikel, I feel, that with that recovery speed in the back line, you have just another athlete that's able to make up the distance. So while he still is learning the distances, he physically has the tools to make up the recovery there. So there's, again, just more athletes. And when you start to talk about Marino coming into the picture here and starting to talk about others when we've got our full strength 11, there really is going to be, I think, a little bit more freedom given to this Arsenal front 5 to start doing a lot of the things that they want to do and commit more men forward. So that was the big takeaway that I felt was a difference in narrative out of possession. I think Calafiori, once he understands those different defensive distances, which he didn't judge on multiple times, it wasn't just the goal, by the way. I think there was a lot of times he left Savinho with a little bit too much to do and too much space. But once he's able to understand those things, we've got a really special player in build-up. And I just think I looked at this team and I thought, you are collectively such an incredible team out of possession. And the amount of focus that we had, I think Gabriel Martinelli will deserve a special shout, who I thought had a brilliant game beyond just his defensive work rate, which he should be praised for. I think his decision making and also what we saw with Calafiori, and even on the lead up to the second goal from the set piece, we see a brilliant moment of Gabriel Martinelli manufacturing space with a wall pass to Gabriel, who's found in the high left 8 position. And all I urge people to do is imagine Mikel Merino in those zones and Calafiori. People are going to start saying Martinelli changed. And I'm telling you, it just has to do with the movement around him and how he's going to be able to get the ball in more advantageous positions. He's going to feel better confident in terms of him receiving the ball. And he's going to make runs that he's not making now because he knows he's going to be found. So Some of that is team, some of that's individual responsibility, but I thought he had a brilliant match.
Yeah, and some of his confidence as well. I think I watched the goal. It's against West Ham in 21-22, where he just runs it through, but Tierney's on that side and giving the space inside. Yeah, looking forward to seeing that. And I think you're right, bang on about Calafiori. Probably on the more negative side, wasn't sure exactly what the plan was with Saka. I think he missed the overlap a little bit from White, but there's so much stuff. So yeah, if you want a proper deep dive into the game, sort of from a with clips and stuff. So yeah, with the whole game, watching the whole game, you can go check that out. But George, are we gonna fall out over this? I think we're gonna disagree, which is, I so rarely disagree with you about stuff, so I'm quite excited about this. Maybe we won't. Probably find out that we're just saying the same thing in different ways. So okay, where should we start with this? Like, what's your overall feeling on kind of like the fallout from this game? How a lot of people, and I understand, and I'll come to sort of explain my position on it, feel that Arsenal are being targeted a bit. Let's start with that. Is that, do you feel that?
The narrative that Arsenal have been spoken about is completely disingenuous, in my opinion, and it's come from multiple sources. Hasn't just come from one. First, we get an instance of teams complaining to the PGMOL that Arsenal suffer from dark arts, and Arsenal are a team that specifically use the dark arts. Then that narrative has turned into Arsenal not just being this gritty defensive team, but Arsenal have relied on using dark arts to get wins, which has been the case on a lot of the Sky Pundits punditry. It was reported by teams to the PGMOL. And of course, we've got athletic articles that are now highlighting it. And the recent fan debate overlap in which both Jamie Carragher and Paul Scholes are pushing the exact same narrative, where I feel as though from multiple areas of the media, there is a depiction that Arsenal use dark arts, and that is the reason that they try to gain advantages. Whereas the scope for this game is incredibly ironic, that I felt City had just as much dark arts engaged. They sat there in the very first minute, and the first thing that they did is they have Rodri attempt to go and block Kai Havertz and then roll on the floor without being hurt, faking an injury. And then they have the entire City players surround the ref. Letter of the law, no, only applies to certain people. Then they were doing that all match. Haaland is going in to barge Saliba a minute later when he's not winning the ball. It is dangerous, but fine. You go shoulder to shoulder, no problem. Saliba gets up. We don't make a big deal out of it. But it is City, once again, being the aggressor in terms of doing something that is definitely cheap. But we play. We ignore. We don't make a big deal out of it. And then there are moments that people have highlighted in the media that Arsenal are the king of dark arts and the king of being bullies, or the insinuation is cheating, time wasting. Meanwhile, we had the longest in-play time of any game in the Premier League. So this idea that Arsenal are doing it more or less than anybody else, A, is, again, for me, hogwash. B, it sets a very dangerous precedent where everybody is sat there making commentary that Arsenal have used the dark arts to win, which I don't think is fair, especially when you look at the game. It just didn't happen. And that, for me, is more of the lie. When I talk about going that strong, when you purport that narrative, when Arsenal were very man-to-man, they only went low block when they went down to 10 men, which is, by the way, something every team would do in world football against most teams, but especially against Manchester City. So this idea that Arsenal are doing something different, or that they're being negative, or they should be criticized for this approach to a game, is wild to me. I'm sorry that we didn't just roll over and didn't accept you trying to be bullies, and we tried to give it back to you. I'm sorry that we fought back. But that should not be something that a team apologizes for. And I know this team isn't. And I know Mikel is absolutely pissed at the narrative about dark arts. It was all over his press conference. And to be honest, I would show it. I would show it. All I saw was an emotional team in Manchester City. I saw them get rattled. I saw them as a club get rattled. And I see an Arsenal squad that are ready and basically unwavering. So I'm happy with our performance, but I'm really unhappy with the narrative that's being projected in the media.
I think there's a level on which I agree with you. I think there's like, there's a lot of kind of the smaller narrative stuff where, like, stuff like the ball in play stuff, and you can come back to it. I think there was a City fan who should remain nameless, who said something about David Raya is taking so long over restarts, and then there was a graphic that came out that Edison does it even more. So we can go into all of that, but I think for me, the more interesting conversation is kind of zooming out a little bit and going, why is this all happening? And I think from that perspective, you can begin to see the wider game here. Look, the Overlap, or whoever it might be, or Sky, or the Telegraph, or whichever publication you're talking about, have an agenda. But their agenda is not against Arsenal. Their agenda is to get clicks and engagement. In the same way that we do, by the way, we're going to title and thumbnail this video in a good way so people click on it and hopefully enjoy our content. Like that's what's happening. I don't think there is a actual agenda against Arsenal, and I kind of take issue with with the word you used then, but also in the rewatch about people lying, because lying by definition is intentionally deceiving people. And I think, look, there's probably some of that happening, but I think a lot of that is people who just don't follow Arsenal as closely as we do. And what I really think is happening, and just don't know stuff. They just, that guy in the Athletic probably just didn't watch the game. And you could argue it's journalistic standards or whatever. But
fair? But is that fair for an Athletic art like journalist to do that? If you're saying that maybe they didn't watch the game, or it was rushed, or it wasn't a well-researched article, do you think that's fair from an Athletic publication that prides itself on trying to separate as being well-researched?
I don't think it's about fairness, because that implies that we're being shafted by it. I just don't think it matters that much. And I think there's a bigger picture, which is what I want to talk about. The bigger picture is that Arsenal are back and people are rattled. They're rattled by that. You see that stuff coming out about like the Man City directors who, refusing to shake hands. If you're Man City and you're watching what's happening, you must be panicking. If you're Liverpool and you're seeing what's happening, you must be panicking. Subconsciously think what's going on is people are realizing that Arsenal are back at the big table. And rather than accept, in my opinion, this kind of victim place that a lot of Arsenal fans seem to be in, I want to go, isn't it great to be back, to people to be complaining about us again? We know it's all rubbish. Like we know the dark art stuff is rubbish. Why get stuck there? Why bother? We have the numbers, we have the stats. Why get, and you didn't do this, I'm not saying this is you, but some people like abusing that Athletic journalist or writing horrible comments towards people. Guys, take a step back. They're scared because we're good again. So enjoy it. Don't accept this victim place where we're going like, you're lying and this person this, and getting so heads up about it. I just think, guys, that it's for me, it's so exciting to go to the Etihad, see ourselves go toe-to-toe with Man City and kind of watch it and observe it. That's my perspective. And I appreciate lots of people. And I also get that people love to defend the club. It's a tribe, isn't it? And I completely get that. But I just think there's some of it that I just think it just goes a little bit too far. And I get that it's football, it's tribalistic, but...
Look, the one thing that I completely agree, like no one should deserve abuse, so I'm not going to defend that.
No.
But I don't think anyone's being a victim. It's what the thing is if someone's going to say something that's not true about my team, I'm not going to accept it. And I think from the reason why it's dangerous, and I'll tell you why it's dangerous in my opinion, have a look at the way that we've been refereed in terms of this restart rule. And the reason that it's dangerous is if you're going to accept that there's a narrative that Arsenal engage in dark arts, which isn't true, but let's accept that premise.
But George, we do.
Referees are going to be more harsh.
And that's okay. We do it.
No, but we do just as much as everybody else.
Yeah, but you just said we don't. We do.
No, we engage in it, but we don't do it disproportionately, which is the narrative that the media, which is the narrative that teams, which is the narrative that Athletic articles are doing. And when you're saying that, then you're saying that Arsenal are a cheating team, and it forces a different direction in how people look at us in major decisions. It forces a difference in how we're reffed. It forces a decision in how different situations occur. And you see it played out in the very first 5 games in terms of how we've been refereed from Brighton to now. And we've seen plenty of other examples, by the way, in which Michael Oliver himself doesn't book Dominic Szoboszlai for the exact same thing and then books Trossard. So if you're going in and you're telling, I don't have a problem with what the media says. I have a problem when it translates to the pitch. And when we find out that Sky Sports is now reporting that the media or that teams have complained to the PGMOL that Arsenal disproportionately use dark arts. Not that they do it, because everybody does it, but that Arsenal do it more than other teams. And then we sit there with facts that say that's not the case. For example, when you quote the idea that David Raya is holding onto the ball that a City fan does, it's not just him. These things get perpetuated. And then now what I'm going to see are referees early blow a whistle and do a yellow card to David Raya because they believe that he's taking longer on goal kicks. And that translation is when it starts affecting the pitch. And for me, that's the dangers of this discourse. I have no problem what other people say, but I'm not going to sit there and admit that Arsenal don't do these things. They do them. They don't do them disproportionately to other people. City in that match engaged in plenty of dark arts, plenty that went unpunished, uncommentated on, and unreflected on. So that's fine, no problem, but I'm not going to sit there and say that my team has done something more than another team when that's not the case. And that's more the thing. And it doesn't come from a victim mentality. It doesn't come from anything. I'm happy we're having these arguments. I've said before, we don't get respected until we start having these arguments. So I'm fully expecting these. But one thing I won't have is narratives being said about the club that I think aren't true.
Yeah,
that for me is where
it's within everyone's right to. I'm not telling anyone what to do. You can, if you disagree with something, absolutely bite back. But I disagree that I think there is a victim mentality, and I think it's stuff like caring what Paul Scholes thinks on the overlap. Why do you care? And I appreciate your point. Is it reflects onto the pitch. I don't think it does, honestly, mate. I really don't. And I think we're putting two and two together here and making five. Like, I honestly don't think someone, in my view, misinterpreting what happened between Partey and Rodri makes false narratives, and we need to stop these lies. It's just so far removed, and I think that's the victim mentality that I want people to recognize, and I think see where it comes from and go, look, here's what's happening. Arsenal are becoming a top team again, so we're going to have to go through the same thing that Mourinho did in 2004. If you go back and speak to Chelsea fans from that period, they'll tell you the media was on as well. Of course they are, because you're upsetting people. I would also argue, George, and come back at you, that say, I think it's difficult. Neither you or I have the data to prove it. But I would argue, if I'm looking around, and I probably don't watch enough Premier League football as I should, I think we do use dark arts a touch more than other teams. I genuinely do. But by the way, that's one of the ways to beat teams. So I'm not against it. I think it's a great thing. But I also don't think we should necessarily shy away from that. Stuff like Martinelli we were looking at it on the rewatch, right? Martinelli going up against Ederson.
But everybody does that, mate.
No, they don't.
I don't think that it's unique.
No. They don't, and other teams don't do stuff like Miles Lewis-Skelly going and telling the goalkeeper to go and lie down. They don't do stuff like the Jorginho thing where he's like being the coach on it. They don't do that stuff. But I like it.
Made their off tactical fouling.
Yeah, exactly.
Early,
exactly.
And they don't get talked about like that. In fact,
but they used to, and this is the thing. We have to.
They still do.
Well, they do get talked about. They don't get talked about.
No, they don't get talked about, but they still tactical foul.
Yeah, sure. But my point is they used to, so they still do it. They used to get talked about it. And we're at that stage where we're elbowing our way to the top and people are going, who are these guys? These guys just turned up at the party. It's your analogy. It's the you're the cousin who's coming to, who's just grown up over the summer and you've always been the quiet one or whatever. And then at the dinner table, you say something and everyone goes, ooh, for the first time. And in 6 months' time, people will just go, that's just what Arsenal are. And then they'll praise us for it. So let's step back from the victim and just go, look, that's what's happening at the moment.
I don't think, again, I'm going to push back. It's not a victim, because what's happening, in my opinion, is now your mother is telling you to go sit in the corner for your comment. And that's happening through the referee. That's happening through how we're reffed. And it's happening in terms of how we're being spoken about and how we must play. That for me is where the disconnect completely happens. And when I talk about lying and when I talk about those things, listen, mate, what ended up happening, and we all do it, by the way, we see a stat, it makes so-and-so look good, and you report on it. And that's what happened. But you do it because your point was supporting the fact that Arsenal played in terms of dirty tactics, in terms of being underhanded. That was your point. And so you saw a stat that supported it, whether it was true or not, and you said it. Now, for me, we've all done it. The point that I'm making is if you're going to have evidence for your point and it not be true, then expect pushback.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
You're going to
I agree with
make
that.
a narrative, like, again, I forget his first name, but I think it was Madley in The Athletic. If you're going to write those things and talk about Greco-Roman tackling from Timber and Akanji when there's two people doing it, you're going to expect pushback. When you're going to say something that happened with Martinelli, which didn't happen, expect pushback. Now, the pushback can't be abuse. There's a line,
Yeah.
and I'm with you on that. But I don't think it's victim mentality to say, well, no, that's wrong. That didn't happen.
No,
So,
what I'm referring to is not pushing back. And by the way, Arsenal should be speaking to PGMOL right now about the unfair refereeing. They're standing up for yourselves. And then there's this next thing, which I'm talking about, which is a separate thing, which is buying into this thing that everyone's against us and the overlap and whatever. Firstly, you're missing the context. And secondly, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't. And I really push back on this idea that because Paul Scholes says something on the overlap, Michael Oliver's refereeing us differently. If he
I don't
is,
think I'm saying
that sounded that way to me, and I think there are some people who are saying that this translation of the narrative into refereeing.
Do you think that the teams complaining to the PGMOL and that constant media talks about how Arsenal highlighting, by the way, the set piece routines, for example, and having hit pieces, which I've never seen on a Sky Sports Sunday since last year, highlighting what Arsenal do on set pieces in terms of what Ben White does. And it wasn't to do with mechanisms and patterns. It had everything to do with focusing on, look at how Ben White pulls the shirt and how he does this. Mm-hmm. When everybody else has done those things, I'm not seeing hit pieces like that. Do you think that none of that has an impact on the frame of mind of a referee coming into a match?
I think it's about, if it does, it is the most back of the mind thing. I think it's actually a little bit disingenuous to referees to suggest that they're looking at narratives and going, yeah, I'm going to referee this game differently. Look, when there is genuine, when there is genuine, when
said it last year that they do,
when there's genuine injustice, we should fight it. Absolutely. By the way, and I completely agree on the disparity in terms of, I think it's 3 Arsenal players and Bruno Fernandes have been done for kicking the ball away. That can't happen. That is not acceptable. So let's push back, because we are the victims of something there. I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about this next thing of going, this person in the Athletic said something and the person on the overlap said something and this Twitter fan said something. Honestly, it's way more indicative of where we are as a team and way more indicative of people being scared of us than it having any translation onto the pitch, onto the players and all that sort of stuff. I just don't think it matters. And I also push back on, because when we say the narrative is, we're usually referring to one person, one article, one thing. There is so much conversation about that. Often what happens, I find, is one person says something that people, Arsenal fans, let's be realistic, slightly disagrees with. Then 10,000 people go, that's wrong. They're saying this stuff about us. One person is. Most of the.
Do you think that's happening like right now, though? Like in terms of.
And also, this is, George, this is outside of Arsenal. Honestly, we could be Chelsea fans and we'd be saying it's so actually, I sat next to, I went and on the overlap and I was with this guy, Sean, and he was saying the media are on at us about our squad. Everyone thinks they're the victim. Everyone does. So this is why I'm pushing back against it and saying, look, when there is genuine injustice, when we're being refereed in an unfair way, stick against it. If we can go to the PGMOL and say, and people are saying, Arsenal doing the dark arts, push back against it. If Tim Lewis wants to talk to the Man City directors at board level and we're having issues eye to eye,
but all that stuff is happening, don't you think?
But that's exactly what I'm saying. That stuff matters. What at Steve343 thinks on X doesn't. It really doesn't.
No, and so I don't think social media is the point.
But my point is the emotion and the ferocity of a lot of people is because of that. Is because of the noise around it. And I'm just going to make this point. The noise is because of where we are in terms of the stage of our project, and because we're clickable, we're engageable. Arsenal fans will click on anything. Of course we will.
Well, we're a big fan base, right? Like, so yeah, there's a part of that. But here, I'll go back to a point that you were making, that referees don't do this. They do, though. Like, Howard Webb made a point last year that the reasons that Kovacic likely wasn't red carded was that Michael Oliver didn't want to ruin the occasion. That was the justification that Howard Webb had said.
What's that to do with Arsenal? At all?
No, it has everything to do with refs bringing in previous biases and choosing when to apply the letter of the law, and it has to do with subjectivity. Now, if it happens once or twice, that's not the point being made. But it does prove, again, that referees absolutely do this, and they're human. I mean, I would do it if I was a ref.
You've said two things. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. What do you
They
think
bring
that
previous
proves?
biases about.
That's not bias.
It absolutely.
That's not
Of course
biased.
it is.
That's about entertainment. Well, the point he was making on that thing was about he didn't, which by the way is fair, but isn't against Arsenal. So what happened there, in my opinion, is that he's basically saying in one instance we're prioritizing the entertainment of the product, and in another instance we're not, which is unfair. But that happens across the Premier League. That's not a bias against Arsenal, and this is again the victim thing where we think we're the only ones who are victims.
So then, why did it happen versus Brighton again? Why, when you're citing
the
this
Premier League,
rule?
mate. It happens across the
So
Premier
when you're
League.
citing a, okay, so then if it happens across the Premier League, then we should have proportionate red cards to this rule. We shouldn't see a disproportionate number.
Rule. That's about not wanting to send someone off, because what he was saying was Michael Oliver didn't want to send him off because of the entertainment of the game, and in other instances they've not said that, or they've certainly left that open to interpretation. We need to decide as the Premier League, as the sport with PGMOL. Am I suggesting there's no issues with PGMOL? No, no, less than you believe. But I'm saying we need to decide whether we're prioritizing the entertainment product, which I would absolutely love, or not. And I would love that to be a directive. But that's not to do with Arsenal. That happened to us, but it happens to everyone. And that's just
but it happened last year in terms of, but it happened last year, and it happened, okay, the reason for doing it, I can accept if you're going to defend the product, but they haven't done that this season.
Yeah, that's an issue with PGMOL. Yeah, but it's not an Arsenal thing.
But that's my point. And Arsenal have been the ones that have been adjudicated that rule more than others. And what I'm saying is the reason why that's happened is because there has absolutely been a push from other teams that hasn't been just media. There has been a push that Arsenal engage in specific dark arts and that you need to watch on these things, that Arsenal do it disproportionately more than other teams. And the evidence for it is when Michael Oliver had the exact same ability to enact this same logic. If this is a new directive, by the way, then apply it consistently across the match. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't. That's the point.
Yeah.
He had an opportunity to do it with Dominic Szoboszlai in his previous match, and he doesn't do it. Mm-hmm. Now he chooses in this match to do it. So I would like to ask you, then what is his thought process for choosing to do it in a previous match and then not do it in a later match?
Inconsistency.
What's the decision making?
Inconsistency.
So then why?
But the jump you're making is that it's against Arsenal. Forest fan. If we're just talking about the entertainment rather than the kicking the ball away thing, Arsenal do have a right to be annoyed about, because that feels like it's being disproportionately done against us. About. No, but you were just talking about entertainment. So you changed what we're talking about. I'm talking about the.
I wasn't.
You changed it, but before we were talking about entertainment. A Newcastle fan would say Fabian Schär, why do we have him sent off? A Forest fan would be sat here talking about Morgan Gibbs-White. We think it's just us, but I promise you...
I'm not making that point, though. I'm not making the point on individual red cards. I'm making the point that we have consistently been adjudicated a wrong rule, an inconsistency, which comes from people consistently saying that we do something disproportionately to another person, which isn't true.
George,
and now we're being ruled against because that has happened to us disproportionately more than other teams.
I agree with you on that. But the point you were making before you transitioned was about the entertainment thing. We were making the point about how Howard Webb basically saying in one incident he was prioritizing the entertainment of the match, and in another incident he wasn't.
I brought that because it's switched. It's switched this season. What I brought that is because it shows that refs have their subjective opinions that they bring, and they choose when to apply rule. Every ref does it. I think that's not an outlandish statement to make. Every ref will do it, and you'll get some, and you'll lose some. That's not the point I'm making. The point that I'm making is that there's a subjectivity there, but now they've tried to make something that was subjective objective this season, and then they're still applying subjectivity to it. That's wrong. Mm-hmm. That's something that you can't do. And that's something that Arsenal have been subjected to more than other clubs. And no one is talking about. So when you talk about victimhood, that's why I brought up entertainment. I didn't bring it up for another reason to say that other teams get fouls.
I mean, people are talking about it. We are talking. We're talking about it right now, and lots of people are talking about the kicking away. Look,
well, in the wrong way. In that we deserve what we're getting.
Yeah, but what you said was no one's talking about it, and I'm pushing back on that. I'm saying that I'm saying that the kicking away thing is obviously a concern and has been unfairly put on us. I completely agree with you, but the separate part here is how much the sort of dark arts come. Put that in a corner. Completely agree. Tick. I'm talking about the conversations around dark arts. I'm talking about the entertainment thing. Let's just finish on that. On the entertainment thing, Howard Webb, or saying, he wanted to protect the entertainment aspect of the sport versus, maybe not saying in other instances, or that not being a factor in other instances. That's an inconsistency. But I would say that I don't know whether you were saying this, but I heard that you were saying that is being unfairly applied to Arsenal. I don't think it is. I think many fans would say across the sport, across the Premier League, last 4 or 5 seasons, that's just an inconsistency that needs to be ironed out.
That argument for that entertainment has inconsistently been applied to Arsenal amongst multiple referees, hence our red cards. We have a disproportionate number in terms of that logic trail.
But if you're protecting the entertainment, then you need to look... Though. Okay, I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying it's inconsistent. But I'm saying if it's about protecting the entertainment, then every Premier League fan is going to go back and say, well, why, that shouldn't have been it was a cheap handball, as whatever it might be. It's not just an Arsenal thing. I disagree. I agree that on the kicking the ball away thing, for a couple of instances, that's been unfair on Arsenal, but not in the sort of the overall panoply of how we referee games. I just don't agree. And I think most fans, I promise you, if you go on the Big Six or whatever it might be, every fan thinks the refs are against them. And is it not more likely that we're in our Arsenal world, we see the Arsenal stuff, we remember the Arsenal stuff, because that's
you admitted that they're being
invested in.
This is what I'm not understanding. You're admitting, and the point that I'm making in terms of entertainment is not, you're blowing up the broad point. And what I've meant was, in this rule, the explanation for why somebody decides to give you a red card after a kick, is in order to preserve the entertainment of the game. That has been the reason as to whether you do it or you don't.
Has it?
That's what everybody has said. The whole reason that you either don't give the card is because you want to preserve the entertainment of the game.
I think you've conflated two things there. Howard Webb was talking last season about the Kovacic challenge. He wasn't talking about kicking the ball away.
No, exactly, because his decision about giving a second yellow, the decision to give a second yellow and make a red card decision affects the entertainment of the game. Now, the reason he felt was the challenge was worthy of a second yellow, but Michael Oliver made the subjective decision that he wanted to protect the integrity of the game and the entertainment of the game. Not even the integrity, the entertainment of the product, and felt, I need to let this go, which I can accept, no problem. Next season, we're talking about having a second yellow card, and the topic is entertainment of the game. That's the topic. How harsh are we going to apply this rule is the topic of conversation. The objective directive from the PGMOL, according to this season, is we are accepting zero tolerance, less than a second. That's been their supposed directive. Now, when Arsenal are being subjected to more disproportionate calls to that, that is in direct opposition to your point. And it's even worse when the same referees have an opportunity to apply that logic. They do so to one team, but then they don't do it to another. And when I say that Arsenal is ref differently, I'm asking you, why does that inconsistency occur? If you're arguing we don't, I promise you, mate, we're not, but then you agree that we're disproportionately getting those calls, then what's your reasoning for why the refs are doing it?
I think you've conflated two things. There is the entertainment point, which is, and then a sub aspect of that is this kicking the ball away thing, where I agree with you, we're being disproportionately targeted. Completely agree with you. But the entertainment thing is a separate thing and is an inconsistency across the league. That's my point. But then you're saying that we're not ref differently, but we are being. I'm saying we are in one aspect, but again, it's isolating what the aspect is, and we should be on at the PGMOL about that 100%. But if we think we're refereed differently across the board in every aspect, and that's because the media piling on it and the piling on.
Well, no, I don't think I've ever said that. What I have said though is I think that it's very dangerous for a media narrative and for teams. I'll go one step further. Teams have done it. They have laid the claim on Arsenal. It's not even just a media narrative. It's come out, well, unless we're saying that reporting's wrong. teams have complained to the PGMOL about our use of dark arts. So it's gone beyond just a media narrative. Teams have laid a claim.
Yeah. Which I've said before,
And
we should be against on an Arsenal level, and should be annoyed about as fans. I completely understand.
Actually, let me ask you that. Let me put it to you this way: do you believe that Arsenal disproportionately use dark arts and gain an unfair advantage?
I think it's
because that's what's being claimed.
I think it's by certain people. Yeah. But I think it's a very hard thing to judge. I would say, and also we're viewing it very much through an Arsenal lens. I think compared to other teams that I see, I think a touch, but honestly, I think it's my point at the start, which I feel like we haven't really necessarily addressed, is this is more about where we are as a team. We're elbowing our way up and people are annoyed about it. And for me, that's a way more clear-eyed view of this than Arsenal are being targeted and Arsenal, there's something bigger going on here.
I guess, do you not see, because part of the thing is I don't think you see the connect. Where I'm coming from is if we accept that Arsenal are disproportionately doing something unfair, then inevitably we should be charged for that. Inevitably. Either you agree that we're being disproportionately engaging in dark arts or you don't. That's not one or two. If we are, then we should be charged for it.
Well, I don't think
we will see that.
I don't think it's possible to be objective about that, unfortunately. So it's you're never going to get a perfect sort of Arsenal doing more dark arts, therefore they're getting charged more for it. I
think what I'm trying to lead you down is that teams are saying this. Mm-hmm. We then have had an instance in a subreddit of that where, okay, do Arsenal take longer to kick the ball away in this subreddit, which is an example of dark arts? Mm-hmm. Yes, they do. Have they been disproportionately reffed on this issue? Yes, they have. Mm-hmm. That is an example of where it's dangerous to allow teams and narrative to translate to the pitch. Because if that is the case, then Arsenal will continue to see this. And I think the frustrating thing is, I guarantee you this rule will never be spoken about in 2 months. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a big issue that Arsenal and Arteta will blow up. And I guarantee you that this rule will be swept under the bus. For example, I've never seen Martinelli get a double yellow in the same sentence. I've never seen that rule applied again. Mm-hmm. And sure, it's by the letter of the law. Mm-hmm. But if we're going to sit there and not address the inconsistency, that's when I sit there and I say it's disproportionately applied and it's wrong. And it comes from this. That's when the narrative can get dangerous. If we remove that narrative, I guarantee you, teams don't look at it. For example, right now, refs are going into it, counting the seconds that are between a whistle and an Arsenal player kicking the ball. That's what's happening right now.
I just don't agree. Let's close up and sort of make our final points. I'll go first, and then you can close this off. Look, is there examples of Arsenal being refereed unfairly? Yes, not disagreeing with that at all. Are there multiple other examples of us being reffed unfairly across the seasons? Yeah, of course there are. If we got a Chelsea fan on here, would they also say we're being refereed unfairly? Yes, and they could give us loads of examples. If we got a City fan on here, the same. If we got a United fan on here, the same. If we got a Liverpool fan on here, the same. My point is, instead of getting sucked into these conversations, and also, I don't believe that the narrative about any one team, but from the overlap saying something or one article here saying it, is ever, maybe there's a tiny thing, but the idea that this is directly translating onto how we're refereed, I don't agree. Does that mean you don't go after the inconsistencies and you challenge them when they are there? Of course not, but they're separate things to me. And I think ultimately my overall point of this whole thing is this: we all, in my opinion, need to take a step back and just go, what's going on? Arsenal are arriving at the top table. We're going to be annoying people. The incidents are going to be around us. The conversation's going to be around us. We click on stuff, so people are going to talk about us. And if we take a step back, I'm not necessarily suggesting you, but I think there are people who view Arsenal as victims, and I don't. And more importantly, I don't think the players should, or Arteta should, and I don't think he will either. If we can take a step back and go, look, there of course is inconsistency and unfairness. That happens, but it happens to all teams. And maybe there's a little flashpoint at the moment for us with a couple of very high profile incidents, but overall it happens to everyone. If we can view that and go, look, people are going to be annoyed at us, and how do we manage that and how do we deal with it? It's a way healthier way of looking at it, in my opinion, than some at the moment. And I just think that is kind of my overall point.
I think that the media has a very strong role to play in narratives. Otherwise,
Agree, but how much they
issues
translate
with-
is the question.
I'll make that connection because I don't agree it's coming from one or two. I'd agree with you if that was the case. If it was only one or two or one Twitter person, or if it was one isolated incident, I'm with you on that point. Fans shouldn't respond. When I talk about the overlap, and I talk about Sky Sports, and I talk about teams reporting us to PGMOL, and I talk about then athletic articles, and then I talk about also now Arteta making comments in the press conference constantly about it. It's now come from 4 to 5 different sources about the topic of dark arts.
But there's a million sources, so that's a drop in the ocean, really.
Well, no, because it's not. Because I mean, you've also got teams complaining to the PGMOL about it.
You were talking
it's
about the
actually
media.
Translated, huh?
But you were talking about the media
because it built from a media exposition. Then it's translated now from a media exposition into teams taking action, and then from that team action, we've now got an outcome in which, in this specific incidence of yellow cards, Arsenal are being disproportionately refed compared to other teams.
You know the PGMOL thing was last year, right?
To make.
You know the PGMOL thing was last year.
Oh, I know, because that was happening last year. And people were saying that of course, we had an entire segment from Howard Webb analyzing Ben White in terms of his dark arts on set pieces. That was happening all of last season. And Arsenal's role in set pieces, it was happening all of last season. Teams then complained, and now we've got an outcome in which referees are now have a decision to make. And if you are going to apply this rule or not, that's up to the PGMOL, and that's up to your inconsistency in the application of the rules. I've seen multiple instances of poor application of the rules. And my point is, I can understand why fans are upset. I can understand why fans feel that there is a narrative building that is dangerous and unfair. I can understand why fans are upset that we're being disproportionately refed in this specific instance. And if we're going to sit here and try to understand the scope for why fans are angry, I understand it.
So do I.
I don't believe that there should be abuse. I also don't believe that Arsenal are somehow always ref differently. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is an example of how a poor media narrative can translate to on-the-pitch outcome. And we're going to see an instance in 2 months. I'd love to pick your brain if we're talking about this in 2 months. And if it's been applied to other teams, because I guarantee you every Arsenal fan is going to be with a stopwatch right now watching the next person to kick the ball away. And they rightly will. I think they absolutely have every right to do that because there's been inconsistency in the last 5 games that have been played in terms of the application of that rule. So I'll sit there and I'll wait to see how the PGMOL will handle it, but they won't. Yeah, I don't understand those collection of rules, but I guarantee you we won't see an instance of somebody now applying this rule consistently. And we will see is a change in the rule. Either they'll get rid of the rule entirely.
Yeah, which is an example of good pressure.
Needed pressure, right?
Yeah,
because it was disproportionate.
Okay, let's finish there. Let us know what you think in the comments. I still love you, George.
Yeah, I still love you too.
just so people, we love each other. The reason we can have these conversations is because we trust each other.
So we have an announcement to make.
Yeah,
I'm leaving the Cannon podcast
after one debate. Yes, no. Let us know what you think in the comments. Look, I'm open to conversation about it. I'm sure George is as well. It's an ongoing situation. There's so many moving parts. The one thing I will say is it's evolving. There's a lot of things that we just can't know. And I hope I've done enough in this thing to say that there's a lot of stuff that we just can't know. There's a lot of kind of, whatever you think of it on whatever side you are, there's a lot of people saying this is the case. I'm like, well, you just don't know that. So I think that's the one thing that maybe I would hope we can sort of translate into the comments, but there you go. Thank you, George.
Thank you, good sir.
If you want to check out the rewatch, we did that. So you can check that out from the bio in the comments. Not in the comments, sorry, in the bio on the description of the video. So you can check that out on Patreon on a free trial. Got loads of stuff coming this week and beyond and more as the Cannon machine moves on. Thank you for being here and thanks for keeping it Arsenal.